Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's first session from Ego to Eco. I'm very pleased to have you all here and to welcome you to this year's Inocracy's first night. My name is Hanno. I am one of the founders of Inocracy and a policy fellow at das progressive Zentrum, and I'm really glad to be here tonight. So when people in the political arena speak about transformation of society, of communities, they all too often believe that all it takes is the implementation of the right policies for moving society into a substantially different direction. And yes, sure, we need radical reform to basically alter the ground rules of our system and of the frame that holds us and steers our lives. And yet, I think many of you know that transformation is more than just a technocratic issue, right? It has an inner dimension. If we want societal transformation to succeed and to actually take place into a meaningful and positive direction, we need something more than just the right policies and than just, good political craftsmanship. We need an inner willingness to develop, to reflect, to take perspective, to unlearn learned patterns and to replace them with new ones. And this individual and also this collective capability to take stock of what is, to acknowledge the patterns that make us today and to let go of those patterns that are harmful to us and to others, this is really what makes transformation and breathes life into transformation. But obviously, when we think about this, the question is, what does it take to catalyze transformation on a societal level? And by transformation, I mean transformation into a positive, meaningful, sustainable direction, the kind of transformation we've been talking about at Inocracy for a couple of years now. What can we actually do systemically to help people change and reflect on their individual mindset and behavior, but also, and probably more importantly, what can we do for us collectively to reflect on what makes us us today and what helps us to become someone else and someone better also on a societal level. Tonight's keynote speaker will obviously not have definite responses to all of these questions, but he's someone who over the past decades has worked extensively on the dynamics of transformation, be it individually in organizations or society. And I'm really delighted to welcome Otto Scharmer to our conference. Welcome, Otto.
Thank you, Hanno. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Otto, let me introduce you a little bit for those who don't know you yet. Otto, you're one of the more prominent voices and change makers when it comes to the inner dimensions of transformation and what it takes for social systems to master transformative change. Otto was born in Hamburg in Germany, and today he lives in Boston, Massachusetts. He's senior lecturer at the Sloan School of Management at Boston's famous MIT. And as importantly, he's co-founder of the Presencing Institute. And many of you, I think, know that Otto, over the last years, has published several very relevant books. He has worked with governments in many countries and with many, many organizations, and his famous theory U, a meta-model for transformation processes, has become well known and much used over the past years across sectors and continents. And adding to that, and I think quite fitting to today's virtual setting, Otto hosted several massive online open courses with thousands of participants over the past years, among them the U-Lab, the Transforming Capitalism Lab, and most recently, the Gaia Journey. Otto, it's really great to have you here tonight, and we're very much looking forward to your keynote, which builds on your phrase from Ego to Eco, and we're looking forward to your input in the next 15 to 20 minutes. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, and let me start with a confession, which is the reason why I joined, why I agreed to join this panel here and this conversation is not because I think I have a particularly actually well-developed answer to the question you asked, but because I think the question you ask is so relevant. How to bring back the future to democracy? I think that is one of the key or one of the core questions of our time. And that's exactly the conversation that we need to have. And that's why I agreed to join this conversation. So what can be my angle into that? I think, I guess so for me personally, that has not been the main focus really in the past, but it is something that I now see is so important, so critical for a path forward that I would like to make it more of a focus. And so on the question of the how, few things that comes to my mind. So how do you make democracy or the future link more, or how do you bring it back to democracy? I would say by making democracy more direct, more distributed, and more dialogic. And what I mean with dialogic is not just people talking with each other. But what I mean with dialogic is basically a shift in awareness and consciousness from a silo to a systems view, or from, to use a different language, an ecosystem awareness to an ecosystem awareness. And how to really create conditions. So a dialogue is not just people talking to each other, but dialogue is a conversation that allows a system to see itself, to inquire into its own assumptions, and to look at the system from all the different angles, not just from my point of view. So that is the direction of my inquiry, right? So of kind of how I would inquire into the question that you asked. And or the starting point. And maybe just kind of based on, as you said, I have been actually working quite a bit with, because if you really double click on all the sustainable development goals, kind of on the environmental, on the need for transforming our economies, and the other big transformation challenge that we face, at the core of that, I think, is something very simple, which is that we need to bring in all these systems together the key stakeholders across the entire ecosystem. And what I mean with ecosystem is basically the other guys that you need to connect with in order to change a system, right? So the ecosystem is kind of the constellation of players that need to work together differently to shift a system from one way of operating to another. So, that's really what I have been focusing on, how to do that in a variety of contexts. And there are a few things that we learned there. But before going there, I would suggest that I would like to actually talk a little bit about the moment. I think there is like a moment right now when you're watching this from Germany. So the lockdown just has been announced a few hours ago, which I think is disputed. So it meets quite some resistance also. From an American perspective, I can say that's exactly what you need to do. Because timing, it's not whether or not lockdown, it's when you do it. Do you do it kind of proactively, or do you do it too late? And if you want to watch what happens if you do it too late, look to the US, look to Brazil, kind of look to other places. And so that's, you're in this moment here in America, kind of, we are in this election moment. The election already started, and it's really you can feel it really the current moment, how you can feel really the tension in the air. You can also feel that anything is possible right now, and I also feel that the time that we have been experiencing, particularly here in America, but also worldwide, over the past 4 or so years, that we have the real possibility now to shift gears, to move into another mode of operating. And when, as I would expect, we will see a landslide next week, when that happens, so when, let's say, Donald Trump is removed from the White House, then we will realize that the actual transformation work is just beginning. And it's because Trump never was the real problem. Trump is the symptom. And the real problem is the structure underneath that is creating him. And that, if not transform, will create the next version of the same problem. So I want to offer a little analysis of what is that deeper structure, right? The structure of Trumpism, which is not limited to America, and that is related to the transformation of democracy. And it is a situation that we see playing out in many places around the world right now. And so the 3 conditions that define Trumpism, in my view, are post-truth, post-democracy, and post-human. And here's what I mean by that. Post-truth is something we all know, right? So it's, and Trump himself was the best embodiment of that. By August, 22,000 lies in office, right? Right now, he probably already surpassed the 25,000 milestone. So did that harm him, the first 22,000 lies? Not that much, actually. Certainly not in the view of his followers, which is exactly the definition of post-truth. So post-truth is not just fake news, because post-truth is something much more nuanced. And when you look at the climate denial industry that here in the US has been funded with more than $500 million, and that successfully turned around public opinion, the key strategy of the climate denial industry is exactly what Trump is currently trying to do with democracy, which is sowing doubt. And it's exactly what, for example, the Russian intervention is also in the US election, 2016 and also 2020 is doing, sowing doubt in the legitimacy of the entire process. So the doubt about whether it's this way or another way, and that we can, and which information to trust, and that in reality we can't know, we can't trust any source of information, and that really means, translates into we can't know anything. And therefore, that's the perfect situation for really a liberal democracy to move forward, because there's really no resistance. No one can know everything, anything. So post-truth is the first condition. And to transform post-truth, I think we not only need to restore science and proper information, we need to learn how to listen with humility. That's really what COVID is teaching us, right? We don't, I mean, what we projected yesterday doesn't matter, right? The virus will teach us kind of what's going to happen, and we need to come down from our I know this, I know that point of view, and be really humble and listen to what reality has to teach to us. And the better we are able to do that, the more proactive we can respond, kind of the smaller the problem. And what you see playing out in the United States with 230,000 deaths so far is that denial is not a strategy. If you're just in denial of the problem and projecting your own propaganda out, reality is going to hit you, even the harder, but with a little delay. So post-truth is really calling for a rehabilitation of science, if you want. And the essence of science is let the data talk to you. It's not projecting my own story into the world, but let the data talk to you. The second condition, post-democracy, is really what I mean with that is architectures of separation, right? When we look at the filter bubbles in Facebook, when we look at the phenomenon that around the world, communities, countries are falling into, and you can see it here in the United States, falling into sub-communities that are no longer able to talk to each other. That's post-democracy, because democracy is not just voting, it's also being in conversation with each other. That conversation is broken. It's not only a question of, let's say, social media, right? So Facebook, of course, playing a major role there, but it's also the issue of minority rule. This week, Trump in the Senate, so Trump appointed his third justice to the Supreme Court. The third justice appointed by a president who lost the popular vote and confirmed by the Senate who also lost the popular vote. So that's the actuality of minority rule today in the US, which is a combination of the Electoral College with winner-takes-all rules, which we need to revise. I mean, it's the inner working, and we need to update to the current realities. So that's architectures of separation that we operate under today call for architectures of connection and call for a new capacity to sense a social field through the eyes of all the stakeholders and through the hearts and the experience of all the stakeholders, including the ones that are most marginalized. So the second capacity that we need to develop really has to do with deepening our sensing capacities and moving beyond our own bubble in having a conversation and reaching out into conversations, including the ones that make us feel less comfortable. And the third condition that we are dealing with these days is what I call it post-human, but post-human is maybe, so let me translate that. It's really kind of the politics of fear. It's kind of the principle of fueling fear, both as a business strategy, aka Facebook, right? So you glue the users to the screen by having algorithms that activate anger, hate, and fear. So, or by successful political strategies, right? AKA Trumpism, right? So that's kind of using fear as a 2016, Trump 2016 today works less good, but 2016, it worked really well, using fear as a mechanism of mobilizing kind of your base. And what does that call for? And of course, we see fear and anxiety disorder rampant in society today. In a recent study, 1/4 of the American young adults admitted, so that was in July, to have seriously contemplated the possibility of suicide. 1/4 of young Americans today. So you see that the issue of fear, anxiety, and depression is a major factor in all school systems, among all young people worldwide today. It has a lot to do with technology, but not only. And what this is calling for, I think, are new learning environments that allow us to activate our action confidence. And what I mean with that term is not just doing something very well or so, but that's kind of like performance confidence. But what I mean with action confidence is the capacity to step into the unknown, the capacity to sense and actualize emerging future possibilities. And that's really kind of when you live in a moment of disruption, when you live in a time of disruption, that's the foundation, what you need as a pioneer, as a leader, as a system, right? Regardless what system. So all systems need to reinvent, reimagine, and reshape themselves. And the foundational capacity is action confidence in the sense of sensing and actualizing emerging future possibility. So how do we activate the courage to act from our generosity, right, as Nipun would say, but also how do we activate the courage to step into this unknown territory that only comes into being if we have the courage to move into uncharted territory. I think that's at the heart of our challenge today. And you cannot just teach that the old way. You cannot transmit that. You cannot claim that this is what people need to do. The only thing you can do is to really create new learning environments that integrate head, heart, and hand, and that allow you to really feel the social resonance. So when you look at the second and third capacity that I mentioned, right? So not just listening with humility, but, you know, sensing the field from the edges, and also then sense and activate and actualize emerging future possibilities. Those two things have a lot to do with sensing social resonance. And you cannot learn how to sense social resonance alone, right? You need like a social space. You need a social field for that. So those are things when you ask, Hanno, so what does it take to really reimagine and reshape our democracy moving forward? Then I would say, well, you know, in fact, in Germany, you guys could be really pioneers there, right? With Save the Bees, that was one of the most successful examples, because minority rule today means that. So in Germany, you don't have like, you know, the folks who lost a popular vote then, you know, confirm the, you know, rule the country. So that's not the German problem. But the German problem is special interest groups, right? Like everywhere. So you basically have special interest groups, very small groups, hijacking the political process, right? So it's kind of the ag industry, think about the coal industry, blah, 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 right? I could go on. And what you saw in Save the Bees, and yet, if you ask people, right, do you want, you know, organic food that is serving the health of the planet and, you know, based on regenerative agriculture and, you know, biodiversity, blah, blah, blah. And you know, also serving your own well-being, everyone says yes, right? No one wants to poison your own body or the groundwater, or, you know, to reduce biodiversity. And yet, that's exactly what we do with the conventional agriculture. That's exactly what globally we fund with $1 trillion of subsidies every year, right? Kind of the wrong ag model. So if you give people the choice, which one should we support with our public policies, right? There's a very clear answer. More than 80% say it's the regenerative model. That's what happens in Bavaria in a nutshell. And that, I think, gives us an insight that how to progress in the transformation ahead, right? So we are just entering the decade of transformation. And we know profound change is necessary now. No one wants a dictatorship. So we need to update our democracy so that that actually the awareness and the consciousness that is already much further developed and the general population can shape more effectively the bigger policy frameworks that should guide our transition to regenerative agriculture, our transition to renewable energy, and so on and so forth. So I think that's where, you know, the elements of direct democracy that do exist in Germany, not yet on a national level, even though there is a, you know, Article 20, right? Article 20, that could be spelled out more. But you have it in the state constitutions, right? Like in Bavaria, like in other states. So that's where it's a big opportunity. And the other one, of course, is the citizen councils, right? That where in the world does that happen today? In Europe, mostly, right? You also have Taiwan, you have other places, but, you know, Europe is really at the front end of that. So I think there is a lot of pieces and kind of the federal structure and the more decentralized structure of Europe lends itself to be a pioneer for that. Because, as we all know, many of the global problems have local solutions. But we need to link these innovations in democracy with new social technologies that have to do with these new types of conversations, with moving from debate to dialogue, and really moving from an ecosystem awareness to an ecosystem awareness, from a silo to a systems view. And that needs supporting infrastructure. And that whole area of development is one of the most interesting and exciting ones that we have. And you guys there in Europe and in the heart of Europe are in the very center of that. So Nipun and I, watching you from across the pond, will be very interested what you will be coming up with.
Okay. Thank you so much, Otto, for shedding some light on the deeper structures of Trumpism, as you called it, but also for closing by saying that the transformation is actually already happening, and there are many pieces and existing experiences and role models that can actually give us hope and guide us the way in some sense. There was a lot in there which we will be building upon in the conversation that follows, but we want to give all you guys the opportunity to reflect with other participants of this conference. So we will have 15 minutes now for breakout groups where you will have the opportunity to get to know a couple of other people whom you hopefully have not met before. And I want to give you one seed question for this breakout group, knowing that today's environment is quite challenging and at times really, really dark. I think Otto talked about this a little bit. I would like to ask you, what gives you hope? And if you come up with points that seem meaningful to you in the conversation, be it a question, an idea, an experience, please feel free to write us in the chat, because we will try to weave in some of your points into the conversation Otto, Nipun and I will be having once you're done with the breakout groups. So we're starting now. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had good breakout sessions and interesting conversations. And I hope there were many points that make you hopeful. Please keep on feeding them into the chat. We have an online desk here where a team is basically reviewing the points and feeding them to us as we speak. So the more you send, the more we can weave into our conversation. So that's very valuable, and thanks for doing that. I'm very happy to welcome Otto back into our conversation, and also to welcome our night's second guest, Nipun Mehta at Inocracy 2020. Welcome, Nipun.
Here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So Nipun, for those of you who don't know him yet, is someone I really like and value for what he does. In the early 2000s, he founded Service Space, which is an incubator of projects that works at the intersection of volunteerism, technology, and the gift economy. It may sound very abstract now, but I can promise you, once you dive deeper into this, you will discover that this is quite an amazing network, which has over 500,000, 500,000 members as we speak. And it has become a sociotope that is highly decentral, highly self-organized, and I would like to say highly human, very kind, and yet very powerful. So please check it out and be inspired. Nipun basically works as a full-time volunteer, I think the only one I know, and he has received many awards for his work. I'm not going to list them. I'm just going to give you two examples. One is the Dalai Lama's Unsung Hero of Compassion Award, and also he received the Jefferson Award for public service. Also, Nipun is very interested in the political space and how we can rebuild basically the systemic architectures we all live in and live with into something more meaningful, which makes him a perfect partner for this conversation, and I'm really excited to have you here. I'm going to say this again. So we spoke about what gives me hope. You did that in the breakout session, and we had a conversation among the three of us. And Nipun, I think I would like to start with you and build on the question. And I want to feed in another quote into this conversation, again by Otto Scharmer, who wrote an article like half a year ago at the start of the global pandemic, which I found interesting in our context. I'm just going to read this real quick. So Otto wrote, what if we use this disruption, so the COVID crisis, as an opportunity to let go of everything that is not essential to our life, in our work and in our institutional routines? How might we reimagine how we live and work together? And how might we reimagine the basic structures of our civilization? And Nipun, I would like to ask you how you experienced the past months, if you would say that something has shifted, and if there happened things that gave you hope and made you even more hopeful than you were half a year ago.
Well, I have had, like everyone else, this very surprising, like how do you hold all the different catastrophes that compound on each other? I mean, it's very difficult. And at the same time, one of the things that's given me hope is how humanity responds to generosity with greater generosity. How we respond that even if we're completely socially distanced, we'll go out in our balconies and start singing songs, and we will start helping those even when we are completely confined and have very limited constraints, and start calling people and chatting online, and young people doing stuff for the older people, and you have older people like the fellow, the British in the UK somewhere, where he decided that he's going to do a fundraiser by, walking laps in his backyard, and he was 99 years old. So I think this kind of thing, like where you just saw hundreds and hundreds of examples, or I'm sure millions. I personally saw hundreds and hundreds of them, and it inspired me that yes, there is tremendous suffering. Yes, that suffering is unequally distributed. And at the same time, you can hold that and say, wow, human beings do respond, do want to respond. And this is not new in the pandemic. I think this has just been, after disasters, you see that everywhere, that people actually just roll up their sleeves and get to work. And they're actually very effective until all the systematic sort of solutions come in, and innovation starts crawling. And the effort and the connection also starts crawling. So for me, I think we have seen a lot of that. And I think we have also seen how deeply we are connected with each other in a many-to-many way, that I could be a carrier of something, the virus. And even though I'm showing no symptoms, I could be an asymptotic carrier, which puts me in a deeper state of interconnection. But we are also carriers, I think, at the same time of, not just the virus, but also things like compassion. And so I think we're just one step away from having had this experience to then take a leap and say, oh, I could be a carrier for so many wholesome things as well. In fact, I've always been a carrier. And so how do I make myself an instrument for propagating that? What is the R naught value? We know the R naught value of the virus, but what is the R naught value of compassion? And how do we circulate more of that? So I think what we've seen in the last 6 months is a kind of shift in consciousness, but I think that's probably the precondition for larger systemic transformations that possibly could happen in the next months or years even to come. So I remain optimistic about the possibilities that we as humanity can embrace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it interesting to think about how this virus made us tangibly experience our systemic interconnectedness. At the same time, Otto spoke about the architectures of separation and how we need
Yeah.
architectures of connection, right, to
Yeah.
systemically change things. And when we spoke a little bit during the breakouts, you said that this whole term, architectures of connection, really spoke to you. Would you like to reflect a little bit on that and share, what it did to you when Otto said that?
Yeah, I really do think we need to create these systems for deeper connections. I think we know about the cheaper, shallower connections because that's what all the online world is geared towards. But we really know very little about deeper connections. And it's a field of deep ties that actually gives you the resiliency. That's the basis. That's the foundation. So for me, the question is really how do we and a symptom, I suppose, of not having a field of deep ties is a lack of trust. Just yesterday, I read this research from Pew about the state of trust in America, and it's dismal. I mean, it's 73% of people under 30, 73% think, hey, by and large, I'm going to take care of myself, and everyone else is going to do that too. That they've lost trust that others would care for them. And I think what trust by itself isn't a virtue, but trust is more of a mirror of our collective virtue. And in some sense, when you have trust that's so rapidly declining, you ask the question, how do we turn it around? And I think it's all the levers we have are so optimized and biased towards short term, right? Politics, the next term, venture capital, the next quarter, like everything's about the immediate here and now, and as a result, we lose the capacity to solve problems that are longer term. And I think trust is one of those problems. I think deeper ties, creating a field of deep connections, is one of those problems that doesn't have a quick fix, and as a result, all our systems are ill-equipped to create deep ties. Everybody recognizes that we need to have deeper ties along with the shallower, looser ties. We can't just have loose ties. We don't just want to cheapen friendship to just a Facebook friendship. Everyone understands that, and yet all our systems are pushing and creating so much momentum in the other direction. So I think in this kind of a context, in this context of short-termism, how do you start to reverse this tide so you can circulate more virtue, if you want to call it that, and you can circulate or arrive at greater trust, which is so fundamental and necessary if we're ever going to get to civic engagement, deep, continuous, sustained civic engagement.
Yeah. Nipun, I know from our past conversations that you think a lot about the intersection of outer systems and inner systems, and how the design of outer system influences basically the inner dimensions and inner aspects of our life and our development. And Otto, I would like to ask you how you feel about this. Do you feel that there is basically a rising awareness that the outer systems need to be transformed fundamentally? Do you feel that something is shifting here? You're muted, I think.
So definitely. So, I remember like 15, 20 years ago, you needed to give a long speech while we are in a crisis, right? So today, that's the starting point. So that you almost wherever you go, there is the awareness that we live in a moment of disruption and that the future is going to be different from the past, and that we need to reimagine and reshape how our system operates. That's not everyone, but it's like many people today. And it's no longer something you need people to convince about. But that's the starting point of the conversation. And then the real question today is not that, but the real question today is how. And that's where what Nipun said with the inner and the outer, and really how to, everything you talked about over the past few minutes, kind of how to develop these deep ties and the deeper levels of civic engagement and trust, right? And trust, you cannot, you have to build that over time. And I think kind of the generating these deeper capacities is something that works multi-local. It's not, you cannot centralize such a process. And that's where I think kind of the kind of networks what Nipun has been doing with service space, which is very similar also what we have been doing with the ULab community, in which Nipun and his story and teaching is like one of the virtual core faculty members there. That's very much linked. I think there's a similarity. And the question is, when you think about the future of democracy, how can we, I mean, I almost feel like there's something missing. So there is kind of the national or international stage, right? And then there is like maybe me as a person who has some awareness, something is broken. But what we are missing, I think, is easily accessible formats, new formats of engagement that bring in the inner and the outer, not as a concept, but as an actual experience in my own context. Formats that you could take and easily replicate in every single city, in every single village, and which then are designed to connect with each other. I think there is like a space, a demand for a new social and awareness-based space of reimagining the way we, not only democracy really, but the way we develop our communities that isn't where maybe the time is right, and maybe, you know, Nipun, the experiments you have been running and some of the things we have been doing are little ingredients that could give an idea or a window into what might be possible. I don't know how you think about that, Nipun.
Yeah, no, I'm totally on board, Otto. I think one of the big things I feel that is mission, before you act, there is a kind of motivation. And you have a whole range of motivations, right? Like scientists who study that will tell you, you have extrinsic motivators at a very high level, broad level, extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators. And I think that all our systems are so biased and optimized for the extrinsic motivators, like money, power, and fame. And this is stuff that you accumulate. This is stuff that you gather. So what about the intrinsic motivators? Right. What we talked about earlier with like right after the disaster, why is everyone just, you know, rolls up their sleeves, doesn't care for credit, just gets stuff done purely in service? What are the mechanics of the intrinsic motivations, and how do we learn to, what are the systems that can support the regenerative intrinsic motivators as opposed to the degenerative extrinsic motivators? Because extrinsic motivators, you have a little bit, and then you need a lot more of it, it's like a drug that needs to happen. Whereas you don't need to do that with things like kindness, compassion, and care. So how do we start to design systems that really support that? And I think as soon as you do that, then you really move from emergency to emergence. Because you have, like right now, we feel so bombarded with like this emergency after this emergency after this emergency. And as a result, we really don't have, we don't even have the space to actually explore what emergence looks like. And emergence at its best is where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So that value is just completely gone because we don't have the space for it, because we have created systems that are so biased towards emergencies and not towards emergence. And so I think a question is also not just systems, but I think a question that begs itself here is also what kind of leadership does it take to hold, like how do you go from a mechanistic leadership of a traditional system that is run by extrinsic motivators? I mean, that's sort of what we teach in traditional business schools. How do you go more towards a living system, kind of a servant leadership, or what we think of as laddership, that supports the emergence of a field where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and is driven by a regenerative intrinsic motivator that multiplies locally and collectively, globally. So I think these are the kinds of design questions that I would ask. And I don't see too many conversations. I mean, Otto has been pointing at this for a long time. I have been pointing at it in a different way, in more in the field of practice also for a long time. But I feel like it needs a lot more people to experiment in these directions to create what Otto called the architectures of connection, because these are all the antecedents of connection. These are the preconditions that create that possibility.
Yeah, let's stay with these architectures of connection for a little while longer, because we saw that there was a lot of response to that in the breakout groups as well. So if we try to translate this basically into the political realm and democratic institutions, I think it's interesting to point out that, you know, many people say, okay, democracy is basically, it's the holy grail, it's the thing we have to protect. And at the same time, we all know that the current setup of the democratic institutions and how democracy works in most countries is part of the problem we face. So I found it super interesting to read this one question, which reached us from the breakout groups. It asks, both of you, how can we approach building architectures of connection within bureaucracies and public administrations? Maybe that's a tough one, but I'd like to get your take on that.
Go for it, Otto.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's examples that come to my mind. You know, there are multiple levels, right? So one is to really take some of the major challenges, put together a team, and then before you develop a policy, you really kind of move into a sensing journey, right? You move out, kind of, you have stakeholder dialogues, you really go to the places that can teach you about what needs to happen, and you bring in all the different voices. So you contemplate what's happened, you know, what needs to happen through the eyes of all the different relevant stakeholder groups. And then kind of you from there, kind of you come up with ideas that you develop a little more and then run by these groups. So that's, for example, in Indonesia, where we have seen great progress. I remember also talking to a really interesting guy. So I think he referred to, or she referred to herself as they. The way of operating was Monday was she was a minister of the cabinet in Taiwan. She is actually, and the way she operates that process is one day. So all the staff that she has are residing in other ministries. So it's kind of totally virtualized. So it was really about the synergy, and kind of all the projects are based on people that actually are embedded in other ministries. And then, so that was kind of one day meeting with those people. Then the second day was going out to the front lines, right? Visiting the villages and having like basically dialogues with citizens and groups of citizens of relevance. And then there was, I think Wednesday it was, an open calendar where you as the citizens could book yourself into a dialogue, right? So you could kind of have a direct access to the calendar and engage kind of in dialogue. So that was somehow democratized. And then I don't remember the remaining 2 days of the week, but that was kind of the weekly schedule. And so what it tells you is, yes, we have, I mean, regardless which government and which ministry you talk to, they all face the same issues, right? It's silo problems, right? Even though all the problems need, the key system problems are across ministries, across these silos. So you want to build in these intelligences, and you want to move out of your own bubble, right? You want to connect not only with the relevant stakeholders today, but also with tomorrow's stakeholders, right? The voice of the future, the voice of nature, and so on. How do these voices come into the process? So there is a lot, there's a lot you can do that puts you in touch with the future. I mean, coming back to the title of this talk, right? Really listening to the emerging future from what you do. And if you want to really, it's when you see the results in the COVID response. I just, 2 nights ago, I had a session with the government of Cambodia. They have in their entire country, right, 15 million people, 283 cases, no deaths, right, in their COVID response. So how is that possible? Well, the same way Taiwan responded, which is proactive, that you do not respond half-heartedly, kind of when it's the problem already has exploded in your face, but that proactively kind of you address these issues and then create for your community a very different situation to deal with. I will, so the cost here, to just close with numbers, sometimes that helps. The cost for the United States in terms of the COVID have been calculated recently at $16 trillion. $16 trillion. So that's the total cost. That's the cost of not being in touch with the future. That's the cost of public policy not leaning into what's about to happen, but being driven by the interests of the past.
Yeah. I would say to add to that, I think one of the things I actually was on a council with under President Obama's administration on eradicating poverty and inequality in the country, or at least addressing it. And one of the things we actually came out with a very thoughtful piece, and the essence of it was how do we move from transactional frameworks to relational frameworks? And I think when everything is very transactional, very direct reciprocity, I do this for you, what do I get in return? And everyone is playing that game, right? Whether you're the frontline worker or you're the manager or you're the, you're running the show or you're the funder. Across that whole stack, you see people engaged in transactions, and then you say, oh, this system's not working, and then you bring in your consultants, and what they do is they optimize it even further, and what that does is it fractures it even more. And so you have a transactional thing, and you say, oh, this is not serving the purpose, let's optimize even more, and what you end up doing is transactionalize it even more. So when a vase falls to the ground, it's easy to break it into small pieces, into small transactions, very hard to put it back together. And I think that's the challenge that we're seeing. And I think that's really, that if you're in a kind of bureaucracy, as the question stated, what I would say is what would be the contextual responses to move from a transactional framework, which starts to become very one-dimensional, to a relational framework, which is very multidimensional. And we looked at case studies. This was in America in Obama's time. So I don't know if it's still relevant or not, but it was, you would look at case studies where one person with one medical condition goes to a government facility and has 78 points of contact. And, everyone knows that's broken, but the only lever you have is to send in more consultants to transactionalize even more parts of it. Is actually trying to hold the vase together and not think, just taking a different approach than breaking a vase down into small, independent parts. So I think that's the challenge. And I think there's various examples of people leading with relationships. And I think there's various case studies. Like it's just a very small example was post tsunami, I think, back in the 2011, 2012. In Japan, people found cash on the streets, and they took that cash and returned more than $60 million US back to the government because they said this wasn't mine, right? This is cash. Now, now you ask the question, like, how do I create that kind of a culture of honesty? Some of it is some governmental intervention. Some of it is, a culture, some of it are the practices, some of it is the systems, some of it is the leadership, some of it is the lack of leadership and a lack of coercion. But to me, asking these kinds of questions is quite interesting, because it starts to point at a multidimensional framework, at a framework that is not just transactional, but is much more relational. So I think it's all there, but I think we need to ask questions.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's a synchronicity, right? It's all there, and yet we do have to reach for something we are not yet capable of doing and what we not yet know. And I think, Otto, you also mentioned this in your talk, that you said, okay, transformation basically takes the courage to step into the unknown and experience things in new ways and do things in different ways than before. And what you followed up with was, you said, okay, we basically need new learning environments that, you know, facilitate doing this. And we need environments that basically create something like social resonance, where we realize, okay, this works. And we got the feedback, and this is my last question to you, Nipun. People found this interesting, but they said, okay, just give me some specific examples. How can this work? And as I know that you're doing this in different ways than Otto, but you're doing this all the time, can you maybe explain a little bit how you create these environments that combine head, heart, and hands? That's the three, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, we could talk a lot about that, but we have been doing a lot of these things called pods, for example. And I think I think the last time Otto and I were in a public dialogue, he had mentioned this, that we have to get comfortable with the gray, which is like, instead of going from polarities, instead of this or this, instead of this binary, it needs to be much more of a yin-yang sort of approach of, you know, even this side has a little bit of this, and even this side has a little bit of that. So how do we start to lead with what in Buddhism they'll say is the middle way, right? And the middle way, I don't think is, you know, people say, oh, there's such beauty on this side, and there's a beautiful path in the middle. You know, I don't think that's the middle way. I think the middle way is more like the tension of a guitar string, right? If it's too tight, it pops. If it's too loose, there's no music. But it's, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, that, you know, peace is not the absence of tension. It's the capacity to hold the right tension. It's having the inner resources, the equanimity to kind of hold the right tension in a skillful way that allows a kind of third force to arise. So how a third force, by which I mean between affirming, this is a Gurdjieffian idea, but between a affirming force and a denying force. Sort of like if the example that's given is a seed in the ground, you know, it's like there's this denying force from the ground and it's underneath and buried, and there's this affirming force. And when that comes together, you have this new flowering. And so I think the question is, you know, how do we do more of that? And I think for us, this has been a post-pandemic emergence at a very practical level. We have been holding these pods where every day you would get reflection. So you get like some reflection, a homework, or if you want to call it homework, but you read something with the head, then you practice something with your hands, like this embodied way of being, and then you reflect and you engage with each other in a heartful way. And when you do that consistently and you throw in Zoom calls in between, it's remarkable how deep the synergy can go. It's not just your own individual transformation, but it's remarkable how the synergy can go. And so at some point, in fact, Hanno, we have spoken about like doing a pod after this as well around love and power, which I think is such an interesting question, right? Like, how do you, what Reinhold Niebuhr quote, let me see, I think I have it here somewhere. He says, "Power without love is brutality, but love without consideration of power is just sentimentality." So how to make power express love and love humanize power, that is the distinctive task of the next 100 years, as Reinhold Niebuhr. But how do we, you know, I think, how do we learn that? And all too often we take a very individual approach of these transformational things that, if I don't learn it, I try harder, you know, and that puts all the onus on our willpower and very little on the social field. And so how do we start to create that social field, hold these questions, embody hands, head, and heart, and allow 1,000 flowers to bloom in 1,000 different directions? I think these are all different kinds of questions. It requires different kind of architecture. We have been working with this in this thing, we call it laddership pods. And so it's been inspiring, and I hope we can engage in one around love and power after this. I think Otto and I are signed up as volunteers. I'm signing Otto up in general. We're good friends, so I can do that to him.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you're underselling basically, because we not only talked about it, you were generous enough, Nipun, to set it up and well, basically commit to doing this pod with us. So if you found the session interesting and you want to inquire further into the relationship between love and power, you can sign up for this. It will stretch over 7 days. Nipun will be there, Otto will be there, and I signed up today, so I will be there as well. And you can go to inocracy.eu/love and power, and I think, I'm not seeing it here, but the URL should be displayed for you to see, and you will be referred to the website, and then you can sign up there, and if you show up, you're very welcome. We're looking forward to basically anyone who wants to join. Nipun, Otto, I would love to continue this conversation, and we will be doing it at the pod, or in the pod, I don't know what the right word is. But here we don't have more time, so I really want to thank you for being here, for being guests at Xenocracy. It was a huge honor to have you, and it was great talking to you. I feel very blessed, so thanks for being here. And we will be having a 15-minute break, but before I tell you what the next session will be, I'm going to ask you to fill out a small evaluation form. It will take 1 minute of your time so that we know how we did during the first day and can improve things on the second day, because we believe in iterative processes, so go for it. And Maria Skora, my friend, she will follow up with a session on concrete futures. What should our cities of tomorrow look like? It's going to be super interesting, because it's not only Maria, it's Francesca Bria, it's Cedric Villani, it's Rita Paravangi and Franziska Schreiber. It's a great lineup, so I hope you'll be there. And again, thanks to you both, and yeah, hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you both. Thank you all.
Thank you.